October 2020, Beale City, Michigan. 13-year-old Lauren Licari's phone buzzes with an incoming text. She glances down, expecting a message from a friend or maybe her boyfriend Owen. Instead, she finds something that will haunt her for the next 18 months. Owen is breaking up with you. The message comes from an unknown number. No name, no explanation. Just a cruel declaration that shatters a teenage girl's world with 11 carefully chosen words. But this wasn't just a prank. It was the opening shot in a campaign of psychological terrorism so vicious, so relentless, and so personal that it would drive two teenagers to the brink of suicide while tearing apart an entire community. For nearly 2 years, an anonymous tormentor would send thousands of messages filled with the kind of hatred that cuts straight to the soul. Messages that knew intimate details about Lauren's life, her insecurities, her deepest fears. Messages that told her to kill herself, that she was worthless, that everyone would be better off if she was dead. The FBI would eventually trace those messages to their source, uncovering a truth so disturbing it would challenge everything we think we know about the people we trust most. Because the monster terrorizing Lauren Licari wasn't hiding in some dark corner of the internet. The monster was living in her own house, sleeping in the next room, making her breakfast every morning, and saying, "I love you," to her face while sending her text messages telling her to die. The monster was her mother. To understand how a mother could become her daughter's worst nightmare, we have to start with what looked like a perfect family in a perfect small town. Beale City, Michigan, is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where high school football games are community events, and where parents trust their children to walk to school alone. It's a town of barely 300 people, where the biggest excitement is usually the annual Harvest Festival and where families have lived for generations. Lauren Licari seemed to have everything a teenage girl could want. She was beautiful, popular, and dating Owen McKenney, a sweet boy who treated her like a princess. Their classmates described them as like a high school couple from a movie, young love in its purest form, innocent and full of promise. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, something was festering. Kendra Licari, Lauren's mother, was struggling with demons that she had kept buried for decades. Kendra would later claim that suppressed childhood trauma had led her to harass Lauren and Owen, revealing that, "When I was 17, I was raped, and other traumatic experiences had never been properly addressed." But trauma doesn't excuse what happened next. It doesn't explain how a mother could look into her daughter's eyes every morning and then spend her day crafting messages designed to destroy her child's mental health. The first message came in October 2020, seemingly out of nowhere. "Owen is breaking up with you," the unknown number told 13-year-old Lauren, targeting the relationship that meant everything to her young heart. At first, Lauren and Owen thought it was just a prank. Middle school and high school students can be cruel, and anonymous messages weren't uncommon in the age of social media. They blocked the number and tried to move on with their lives. But the messages didn't stop. They evolved. What started as simple relationship sabotage quickly escalated into something far more sinister. The anonymous tormentor seemed to know intimate details about Lauren's life, her schedule, her fears, her insecurities, her family dynamics. The messages attacked her appearance, her personality, her worth as a human being. Most disturbing was how personal the attacks became. This wasn't random cyberbullying. This was targeted psychological warfare designed by someone who knew exactly where Lauren was most vulnerable. As the months passed, the messages became more frequent and more vicious. The anonymous number would text Lauren during school, during family dinners, in the middle of the night. There was no escape, no safe space, no moment when she could forget about the voice in her phone telling her that she was worthless. The psychological impact was devastating. Lauren, once confident and outgoing, became withdrawn and anxious. Her grades began to slip. She lost interest in activities she had once loved. She started pulling away from friends and family, isolating herself in a world of fear and self-doubt. Her mother, Kendra, watched all of this with what appeared to be genuine concern. She comforted Lauren when she cried. She encouraged her to ignore the messages. She even helped contact school authorities and eventually law enforcement when the harassment escalated. Kendra Licari was playing the role of the supportive mother while secretly orchestrating her daughter's psychological destruction. It was a performance so convincing that it fooled everyone, including, at times, herself. But the messages were just getting started. The anonymous tormentor was preparing to escalate from psychological harassment to something that could have ended in tragedy. By September 2021, the harassment had resumed with a vengeance that shocked even those who thought they had seen the worst of online cruelty. What had started with occasional suspicious texts in October 2020 resumed in September 2021, devolving into a daily barrage of threats and vile insults over the next 15 months. This wasn't episodic bullying anymore. This was a sustained campaign of psychological terror. Lauren and Owen received thousands of text messages that included vile insults from their anonymous tormentor. Thousands. Let that number sink in for a moment. Someone was spending hours every day crafting messages designed to destroy two teenagers' mental health. The content of these messages was so disturbing that even seasoned investigators struggled to comprehend the level of cruelty involved. The anonymous number didn't just insult Lauren and Owen, it attacked their relationship, their families, their deepest insecurities, and their will to live. Kill yourself. Nobody loves you. You're worthless. Everyone would be better off if you were dead. These weren't just words on a screen. They were psychological weapons wielded by someone who understood exactly how to inflict maximum emotional damage on vulnerable teenagers. What made the harassment particularly insidious was its intimate knowledge of Lauren's life. The messages referenced private conversations, family situations, and personal details that only someone very close to Lauren could have known. This wasn't a random cyberbully, this was someone in her inner circle, someone she trusted, someone who had access to the most private corners of her existence. The impact on Lauren was catastrophic. She began to exhibit classic signs of severe psychological trauma: depression, anxiety, social withdrawal, and suicidal ideation. Her grades plummeted. Her relationships with friends deteriorated. She lost weight and struggled with sleep. Owen, too, was devastated by the constant harassment. The messages attacked not just him individually but his relationship with Lauren, trying to convince him that she was cheating, lying, or manipulating him. The psychological pressure was designed to destroy their young love from the inside out. The families watched helplessly as two bright, promising teenagers were slowly destroyed by an invisible enemy who seemed to know their every move and vulnerability. But the most heartbreaking aspect of this nightmare was the scene that played out in the Licari household every evening. Kendra would comfort her sobbing daughter, holding her while Lauren cried about the latest round of cruel messages. She would offer tissues, words of encouragement, and promises that they would find whoever was doing this. Then, after putting Lauren to bed, Kendra would pick up her phone and start crafting the next day's messages. The psychological compartmentalization required to maintain this double life was staggering. Kendra had to suppress her maternal instincts, ignore her daughter's obvious suffering, and continue feeding the very beast that was devouring her child's mental health. What could possibly drive a mother to terrorize her own daughter with such systematic cruelty? The answer would prove to be as disturbing as it was incomprehensible. As the harassment escalated and the psychological damage to Lauren and Owen became impossible to ignore, law enforcement finally became involved in what would prove to be one of the most shocking cyberbullying cases in American history. The investigation revealed a disturbing 2021 cyberbullying case in Michigan, where the anonymous attacker used salacious, vicious text messages to hound two small-town high school students for a year and a half. Initially, local police treated the case as a standard cyberbullying incident. They assumed they were looking for a troubled teenager, a jealous classmate, or perhaps an adult with a grudge against one of the families. The sophisticated psychological manipulation and intimate knowledge of the victims suggested someone in their social circle, but investigators had no idea how close to home the truth really was. The technical investigation proved challenging. The anonymous number used various methods to mask its identity, suggesting a level of technical sophistication that went beyond typical teenage pranking. The messages came at all hours, from different apps and platforms, making it difficult to trace their origin. But as the harassment continued and the messages became more threatening, federal authorities were called in. The FBI got involved when the cyberstalking reached a level that crossed federal crime thresholds. This was no longer just a local police matter. This was a federal investigation into systematic psychological terrorism. The FBI's digital forensics team began the painstaking process of tracing the messages back to their source. They analyzed metadata, examined IP addresses, and followed digital breadcrumbs that the perpetrator had tried to hide. The investigation required sophisticated technology and expertise, but federal agents were determined to identify the person who had spent nearly 2 years tormenting two innocent teenagers. During this entire process, Kendra Licari maintained her role as the concerned mother. She cooperated with investigators, provided information about her daughter's schedule and social circle, and expressed appropriate outrage about the ongoing harassment. She attended meetings with law enforcement, offered theories about potential suspects, and demanded justice for her daughter. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award, and it was about to be exposed as the greatest deception in the case. The breakthrough came when FBI analysts finally traced the digital signatures back to their source. The trail of evidence led not to a jealous classmate, not to a disturbed stranger, not to any of the usual suspects that investigators had been pursuing. The trail led directly to Kendra Licari. The woman who had been comforting her crying daughter every night was the same person sending the messages that made her cry. The mother who had demanded justice for her child was the criminal who needed to be brought to justice. When FBI agents arrived at the Licari home to make the arrest, they found a woman who had been living a double life so complete and so convincing that even her own family had been fooled. The moment of revelation, when Lauren learned that her own mother had been her tormentor, was a psychological trauma that may never fully heal. The person she had turned to for comfort, protection, and love had been the architect of her suffering. The betrayal was absolute, complete, and devastating in ways that go beyond ordinary criminal behavior. This wasn't just cyberbullying, this was matricidal psychological abuse dressed up as anonymous harassment. December 2022. The FBI arrests Kendra Licari at her Beale City home, bringing to an end one of the most disturbing cases of parental abuse ever documented. Kendra Licari was arrested and charged with multiple counts of stalking and using a computer to commit a crime in December 2022. But the charges, serious as they were, could barely capture the magnitude of what she had done to her own daughter. The formal charges included 2 counts of stalking a minor, 2 counts of communicating with another to commit a crime, and 1 count of obstruction of justice. Each count represented months of systematic psychological torture inflicted on vulnerable teenagers by someone who should have been protecting them. But the legal charges paled in comparison to the emotional devastation that Kendra's actions had caused. She hadn't just broken laws, she had shattered the most fundamental bond of human trust, the relationship between a mother and her child. When the arrest became public, the small community of Beale City was stunned into silence. Everyone knew the Licari family. Everyone had watched Kendra play the role of the concerned mother, seeking help for her daughter's harassment problem. The revelation that she had been the perpetrator all along challenged their basic assumptions about human nature and parental love. For Lauren, the discovery was devastating on multiple levels. Not only had she endured nearly 2 years of psychological torture, but she learned that torture had been inflicted by the one person she trusted most in the world. Every moment of comfort her mother had provided had been a lie. Every expression of concern had been manipulation. Every hug had come from the same hands that typed messages telling her to kill herself. The psychological impact of this betrayal cannot be overstated. Lauren had to process not only the trauma of the harassment itself, but the additional trauma of learning that her primary source of emotional support had been her primary source of emotional damage. During the investigation and legal proceedings, disturbing details emerged about Kendra's methods and motivations. She had used sophisticated techniques to mask her identity, suggesting premeditation and careful planning rather than impulsive cruelty. She had studied her daughter's vulnerabilities and crafted messages designed to exploit specific psychological pressure points. Most disturbing was the revelation that Kendra had been manipulating not just her daughter but the entire investigation. She had provided false leads to law enforcement, suggested innocent people as suspects, and actively worked to misdirect the investigation while maintaining her facade as a concerned parent. Kendra later claimed that suppressed childhood trauma, including being raped at age 17, had contributed to her actions. While trauma may explain some behaviors, it cannot excuse or justify the systematic psychological torture of one's own child. Millions of people experience trauma without becoming perpetrators of abuse against their own families. The case raised uncomfortable questions about the nature of parental love, the potential for evil to hide behind familiar faces, and the devastating impact that trusted figures can have when they betray that trust. As the legal process moved forward, the community struggled to understand how someone they knew and trusted could have committed such unconscionable acts against her own child. The case would challenge everything they thought they knew about recognizing danger and protecting children. March 2023. In a courtroom in Michigan, Kendra Licari faced the consequences of her actions as she stood before a judge to answer for nearly 2 years of psychological terrorism against her own daughter. She pleaded guilty to 2 counts of stalking a minor and was sentenced to 19 months to 5 years in prison after apologizing to Owen and his family during her 2023 trial. The plea hearing was one of the most emotionally charged courtroom scenes in recent memory. As Kendra stood before the judge, she was forced to confront the full magnitude of what she had done to her own daughter and Owen. The woman who had spent nearly 2 years hiding behind anonymous numbers now had to speak her crimes aloud in open court. Her apology, while legally required, rang hollow to many observers. How do you apologize for systematically destroying your own child's mental health? How do you express remorse for exploiting the deepest bonds of trust and love to inflict maximum psychological damage? The victim's impact statements were heartbreaking. Owen and his family described the ongoing psychological trauma, the difficulty trusting others, and the long road to healing that lay ahead. But the most devastating impact was on Lauren herself, who had to process not just the harassment but the ultimate betrayal by the person who should have been her greatest protector. As part of her sentence and legal restrictions, Kendra wasn't allowed to remain in contact with her victims, including her daughter. The court had effectively terminated Kendra's relationship with Lauren, recognizing that the mother-daughter bond had been so thoroughly corrupted that continued contact would only perpetuate the abuse. This judicial decision highlighted the unprecedented nature of the case. Courts regularly deal with parents who abuse their children, but rarely do they encounter a case where the abuse was so systematic, so deceptive, and so psychologically sophisticated that the parent-child relationship had to be severed entirely. The 19-month to 5-year sentence, while legally appropriate, seemed inadequate given the scope and duration of Kendra's crimes. She had spent nearly 2 years conducting a campaign of psychological terrorism against her own child, causing damage that might never fully heal, yet she would serve less time in prison than she had spent tormenting her daughter. Kendra was released from prison on August 2024, having served her minimum sentence. Her release raised new questions about accountability, rehabilitation, and the ongoing safety of her victims. The legal resolution provided some measure of justice, but it could not undo the damage that had been done. Lauren would have to rebuild her entire understanding of trust, love, and family relationships. Owen would have to process the trauma of being targeted by someone he had trusted as a parental figure. The case established important legal precedents about cyberbullying, parental abuse, and the use of technology to inflict psychological harm. But beyond its legal significance, it served as a chilling reminder that the greatest dangers to children often come not from strangers but from the people closest to them. The justice system had done its job, but healing would take much longer than any prison sentence could provide. Today, more than a year after Kendra Licari's release from prison, the victims of her psychological terrorism continue their journey toward healing and recovery. Lauren Licari, now older and forever changed by her experience, faces the ongoing challenge of rebuilding her sense of trust and self-worth after being systematically undermined by her own mother. The teenage girl who once believed her mother was her greatest ally now knows that her greatest enemy was living in the same house, sleeping in the next room, and saying, "I love you," while plotting her psychological destruction. The healing process for Lauren involves not just recovering from the cyberbullying itself, but processing the profound betrayal of discovering that her primary source of comfort had been her primary source of pain. She must rebuild her entire understanding of relationships, trust, and family bonds. Owen McKenney and his family also continue to deal with the aftermath of being targeted by someone they had trusted as a parental figure. The harassment didn't just attack Owen individually, it was designed to destroy his relationship with Lauren and undermine his sense of security and self-worth. The case has had broader implications beyond its immediate victims. The Netflix documentary, Unknown Number, The High School Catfish, explores the shocking true story of a mother who catfished her own daughter, meaning she sent hostile text messages from an unknown number, including several telling her daughter to kill herself. This media attention has brought national awareness to the case, but it has also meant that Lauren and Owen must relive their trauma in the public eye. The story of their abuse has become educational content, helping others understand the potential for evil to hide behind familiar faces, but at the cost of their privacy and peace. The case has prompted important conversations about several critical issues. Digital safety and cyberbullying prevention, the sophisticated methods Kendra used to mask her identity, and the psychological precision of her attacks have led to new awareness about how technology can be weaponized by those closest to victims. Parental abuse recognition. The case challenges conventional wisdom about recognizing child abuse, demonstrating how perpetrators can hide behind facades of concern and support while secretly orchestrating their victims' suffering. Mental health support. The psychological damage inflicted by Kendra's actions highlights the need for specialized therapeutic interventions for victims of complex familial abuse, particularly when the abuse involves deception and betrayal by primary caregivers. Legal framework evolution. The case has contributed to discussions about how cyberbullying laws need to evolve to address sophisticated psychological manipulation, particularly when perpetrated by family members. For the community of Beale City, the case shattered assumptions about safety, trust, and the ability to recognize dangerous individuals. A town that prided itself on knowing everyone discovered that they hadn't really known one of their own at all. The healing process extends beyond the immediate victims to include a community that must reconcile the reality that evil can hide behind the most innocent facades, that monsters can masquerade as concerned parents, and that the greatest dangers to children sometimes come from within their own homes. The case serves as a permanent reminder that vigilance, compassion, and sophisticated understanding of abuse dynamics are necessary to protect the vulnerable from predators who may be hiding in plain sight.